I really like video games. No! The games aren't the only event appreciated, though. Naturally, if I care so much about these things, then I also care about the systems that actually run them. The consoles themselves are some of the most fun parts of game collecting once you actually start to analyze them. I love the uniqueness of the designs, the console boxes, the thinking about things like, oh, this one was more powerful than this one, but this one decided to be stupid with disc size. And one element of consoles that always randomly comes into mind is the console startup. For those that don't know, a console startup is the little animation and/or jingle that plays each time you power on your console. And for something that is so prevalent, considering you will basically see it every single time you power on your console, it's surprisingly really not talked about much, at least from what I know. You can find plenty of videos that compile all these throughout gaming history, but nobody really talks about them in detail. And I mean, I'm not here to write a thesis about it, but I might as well give them my 2 cents. I'm only going to be looking at the major consoles since 1985, and major is whatever I decide, so sorry. Look, I was born in 2008. I like gaming history, but I can only care so much about, like, the Satellaview. I'm also not talking about any handheld systems, because honestly, this script is really long by my standards, and I kinda just want to get it over with. Maybe all the ones I miss can be discussed another day. And also, most of these are the North American openings unless I specify otherwise. So with all of that, let us begin with the classic, the Nintendo Entertainment System. It didn't have one. Or at least in North America it didn't. See, in Japan, their version of the NES, the Famicom, had a startup. If you had the console's optional disk system add-on attached and turned it on with no game in, you got... And I mean, I like it. I don't really have any strong opinions on this startup, it's just a pleasant 8-bit tune. If you leave this screen on for a while, you get Mario and Luigi running back and forth, switching on and off this light switch, I guess it is? Does that beat out the Sega Master System? I don't know. Both of these feel like the definition of a retro startup. I like them both, they sound nice, but you could swap them with each other and it would feel no different. The pizzazz hadn't really been worked into these things yet, but that would basically immediately be remedied with the next generation. The SNES never had a startup, but the Genesis did, and to be fair... Sega! How would they have ever competed against this? This is just such a lovely jingle, one so nice and iconic that Sega continues using renditions of it in their modern games. The animation for the logo itself is very basic, but I think the sound alone more than does what a console startup should do. It gets you in the mood to play Genesis, it's memorable, and it fits with the kinda punchy, bold nature of the Genesis. This console is nowhere near one of my favorites, I just love how simple yet effective the startup is. Definitely a bump up from the Master System, which was already neat. And also, technically, this isn't actually the console startup, it's built into every Sega Genesis game cartridge, but at that point it's basically a console startup. Moving on to the 3D era, there was a new contender on the block, the PlayStation. As a newbie console in the field, being abandoned by Nintendo and whatnot, how do you convince people that this system really is some hot stuff, that your 3D system is the best on the market? Well, make the users feel like they're going to the future. This startup isn't the craziest visually, but the sound design definitely gives off next level vibes, especially the fluty notes at the end. At least, I think that's a flute. I'm really bad with instruments. I like the PS1 startup, but I still feel like they're beat out by Sega with their Saturn. I don't know, this one just feels more magical with the sounds, which I think for the older consoles I prefer, and I like how they immediately started by showing animations and effects that couldn't have been done on the Genesis, giving you a taste of your next generation system. Maybe it's more of a statement that the PS1 doesn't feel the need to do that, and clearly it was right, but I still like the Saturns more. But hey, both of those were better than the N64s. I don't know, man. Like the Famicom, this startup only plays if you have the 64DD add-on attached to your console. And like, it ain't bad at all, but it doesn't really do much for me other than that's kinda cool. Once again, I like how it proudly presents the new, fully 3D graphics of the system, but it's a lot more basic than the Saturn, so it feels a lot less nifty. Even still, the N64 is one of my childhood consoles, so I would love to own one of those 64 DDs one day and see this startup in person, but Now the 6th generation is where everyone brought on their A-game. I think all of the console startups around this time were sublime, starting with the Sega Dreamcast, which I've never owned. But god do I wish I did. This is just really nice, man. It fits with the console so well, especially since it's called the Dreamcast. This feels heavenly. The animation is so satisfying to watch, and if I was a kid in the 2000s booting up this console and got to see this every time, I think it was the greatest console ever. Again, I've never owned this thing, so apologies if I sound like an idiot, but regardless, another A+ for Sega. It's a shame this was their last console on the market. Segueing to Sony, if the PS1 was trying to take you to the future, then the PS2 was taking you to a dreamscape with this startup. I think this startup is also incredible. With the PS1 having been the best-selling home console ever at the time, Sony knew they were a force to be reckoned with and treated the PS2 as the gateway into the best possible gaming experience. Thus, this intro gives off a sense of entering a heaven world, at least to me it does, and you have all this eye candy and effects that, once again, couldn't have been done on previous hardware. Like, I don't know why this cube is right here, but I like it. Now, with Microsoft's debut console, the Xbox, I initially didn't really care for its opening. Like, it just felt kinda hollow, I guess, but as I think about it more, it's actually quite nice. This startup is kinda over the top, but that fits well with how bold and confident this thing is. And with the Xbox being by far the most powerful console in the 6th generation, I love how the opening gives off the vibes of something intense being generated, something strong and menacing, before the camera zooms out and shows you we're in the Xbox logo. They got all that going on in there? I don't know, that's just really cool to me. But of course, the best startup of the 6th generation, the best startup of all time, you knew it was coming. Everything about this is genuinely so perfect and clever. Allow me to overanalyze it for a moment. You have a single cube drop down and stick for a moment, accompanied by a very satisfying, with the translucent cube also appearing for a second when it drops down. Then, that initial cube rolls around into the shape of a larger cube, while leaving a trail of squares, can you tell this thing is a cube, before hopping up and dropping into the full proper logo of the console, again with a very satisfying. Everything about this is just perfect, I tell you. Anytime I turn on this console, I'm excited to just see the animation play, to hear the overly catchy melody that plays. I have a distinct memory of hooking this thing up for the first time and genuinely getting chills seeing this play in real time in front of me. Easily the best startup ever in my opinion. Compared to the 6th gen, I think the 7th generation of console startups were equally as iconic, but they just don't have the same level of perfection as their last gen counterparts. Like, the Wii startup is literally just a kinda pointless health and safety warning before leading you to the main menu and playing an admittedly very memorable and nice jingle. And like, that's cool, objectively more people remember and are nostalgic for that opening than the GameCube's. But like, it just ain't beating this. It's not as clever or special. It's a shame not seeing greatness transfer over. Same story with the PS3. You have a very pleasant violin opening and a white wispy band in the background that's always reminded me of bedsheets for some reason. And again, this is good. I'm very nostalgic for this opening, and I think it definitely invokes a feeling of next gen. But when I look at what the PS2 had, the PS3 just doesn't come out on top. Surprisingly, the Xbox 360 is the only startup I feel got better compared to the last generation. The original opening for the system, I don't really care about this one, this is boring, but they changed it after the Kinect came out, and that one... This is nice. I definitely feel the original Xbox opening was a lot more fun, but this just feels modern and substantial, and I especially like the sound design with the... Basically, the 360 wins the 7th generation. But the 8th generation is where everyone decided to stop caring, I guess. Starting with the Wii U. Now, all Wii U owners know this thing could have a very annoyingly slow UI sometimes, but credit where it's due. I never got tired of this. I mean, it's not at all exciting, considering it's just 2 still images. Not really iconic at all, especially compared to their last 2 systems. But I mean, the tune is nice. Honestly, I think the best comparison to this would be the Sega Genesis's startup, but where this was loud and proud, the Wii U's opening feels kinda awkward and like Nintendo is really trying to be like Apple with how basic it is. Your controller literally looks like this. Somehow I still prefer it to the PS4's though. Man, look, it's not like it's bad, but it's just, how do we go from this to this to this? I really like the music that plays and everything, but same with the Wii U's, it's just too basic. In the Xbox One startup, there's a reason I never owned this console. Interestingly, the Xbox One X specifically has its own opening animation, really leaning into how powerful the thing is before going into the original opening, and that's how it's supposed to be. I don't know why the opening wasn't always adjacent to something like this, but it easily beats out all the other offerings of the generation. As for the Switch, some people have considered this to be the opening, but that only happens the very first time you boot on the console. Every other time, this is the worst startup of all time. The PS5's is kinda neat, I guess. Definitely has more of a wow feeling to it than the PS4's. The sound it plays is really nice, and I like the particles and light rays coming in. Definitely feels next gen. It's not fun though, Xbox Series startup. I have no words. And that's all the console startups that I care about, ever! I know I probably felt like I was going quick at the end and didn't say much about the newer ones, but like, I really just don't find them as interesting and thus there's less to analyze. All the startups now feel like the companies are trying to be so minimalistic and to the point, and I get that desire, but the golden days were when these things were whimsy, had fun, or just had confidence. Now it feels like the companies are content because everyone already knows what a Nintendo, PlayStation, Xbox is, so why go over the top for something as simple as turning on a console? And that makes sense, but I'll always appreciate back in the day where these startups alone were enough to excite and make you prideful for your console. Because it could just be being older, but I do not get that feeling with the modern systems.